Moving on to the best seasons in Pacers history by position. Today, we're looking at shooting guards. And yes, we're going to talk a lot about Reggie Miller, but not maybe for the reason you expect. It's all coming today on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, y'all? Happy Tuesday, and welcome into another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and SI, and today we're diving back in to historic Pacers seasons and looking at the best Pacers individual season by a shooting guard in franchise history. We did point guards last Friday. We'll do small forwards and maybe power forwards too next week as we dive into the best individual seasons the Pacers have ever seen from one player. And today we're looking at shooting guard, which is fun because the most iconic and best player in Pacers history played at shooting guard. And this was a very fun exercise for me because, I mean, a little bit of a spoiler alert, you know, this is going to be, okay, Reggie Miller. Reggie Miller is the best season by a Pacers shooting guard ever. Which one was it? That is what this project became for me, more of what was Reggie's best season. I wonder what he would consider his best season versus what the league does versus what historical context suggests is. And who else sneaks into this? You know, there's obviously one very high profile recent shooting guard season and a couple other pretty good ones. What else cracks this list? This one was really interesting to me, and a similar discussion to point guard that I opened with will be talked about here, but it's less matters here than it did with the point guard position, because what you do at the two guard throughout NBA history and up till now has been a little bit more of a straight line than point guard, where last time we were talking about, okay, George Hill was more off the ball, but he was a good defender and he could shoot, he could defer to other guys, but he was still the point guard and he was really impactful. That was great. And Michael Williams did this, and Tyrese Haliburton does that. Like, all these guys play differently, but they're still the point guard. A lot of these shooting guards, we don't need to zoom out that far. There's a lot of scoring involved. Efficiency is a big component. If you can guard someone, that's a huge component, right? It's a lot easier to really, compare these players to each other because of that, even though there's some guys who objectively were wings. Like, they played the three later in their career. They even played the three for the Pacers later in their career in a lot of these guys' cases. Or they played point guard other times in their career, but they definitely were shooting guards with the Pacers. But that kind of is less different than it was for ones. But, one guy we're going to talk about was a great passer and created for his teammates at high level. One guy we're going to talk about was an all-league defender that season, right? Like, all sorts of stuff. Shooting really matters. So while comparatively stats might seem more similar to a point guard, how you got there, what you did really matters, especially in the context of the league. And that kind of brings me to point two, and something I didn't make in the point guard episode, and something that's going to matter in separating some of these Reggie seasons is two things I wanted to get to for this. Three, actually. One is I'm only doing NBA seasons for this. It's just impossible to get enough historical ABA context from this. Two is I'm using Basketball Reference for positions. I do actually look back at the team and who played what and what the roster was, but that's how I start. And three is I have to, and I didn't do this enough with the point guards, although it worked out that it shook out the list I wanted, would have been the same regardless. But I'm using playoff success more this time because that matters in the course of a player's historic season. So Reggie is the place to start here because, I mean, he had so many different types of seasons that stand out in his Pacers tenure, right? His third season in the NBA, Reggie Miller averaged almost 25 points a game. He finished second in most improved player. He made his first All-Star team. He played all 82 games. 1990 was awesome. And they only played 3 playoff games, right? They did not have a good postseason season. That team was not terrific. They were one game over 500. They got thrashed by the Pistons in the first round. So that was his coming out party, and he can really score. And, hey, the Pacers are in the playoffs, but that didn't amount to much, right? Versus a season like, for example, 2000, where his scoring is 6 less points per game than that year, but he still was an all-star. He's still shooting at a tremendous level. He's still incredibly efficient and talented, but that Pacers team made the finals. And in that playoff run, Reggie averaged 24 points a game and played in 22 playoff games. So that season, in the regular season, he played 81 games, so just one fewer than the first season I said, right? But if you add in 22 playoff games, he played way more. So one of those seasons is better, right? The regular season, you might say, oh, the guy who scored a lot and was still an all-star. You might say, oh, the guy who got MVP votes and helped a team get to the finals. And the more I watched that team, Jalen Rose was extremely underrated and getting the Pacers there. But like, that's the kind of thing that makes this specific position one. I think this is going to be probably the hardest one to actually pick the best season and really the top couple, because it's kind of pick your flavor with Reggie. Some other guys are going to sneak in there. In fact, I won't say who, but a very recent, I mean, you can all figure it out. A very recent Pacers season is going to be in the top 4, and I considered putting it top 3, but that's what made this one harder, because it's not certain guys. Like last time it was, okay, Don Busey or Mark Jackson, Michael Williams. How do you separate these guys? George Hill, should he actually be in the top 5? Probably not. There was actual different names, and I wanted that to be part of this. It's like, let me talk about all these guys. We're going to do that here. But this time, it's not going to be that at the top. It's going to be like, how do I rank these 3 or 4 Reggie seasons as the best? And what mattered as the best for the Pacers, right? The year he's scoring the most, they don't win anything. When his scoring goes down a little bit, he transforms his game to be one of the most high-volume three-point shooters in the league. Then the team is awesome at the same time. But he's 1 year where he does that, and they're not very good. So putting that all together is really hard. And I think that's going to be the part at the end where I think people who can historically contextualize this stuff better than me will be helpful. Again, I've done my best over the years to get better at Pacers history, and I will do my best today. But that is where this one might be the hardest and most hair splitting. I'm going to just name some of the contenders that you're going to hear today, and then we'll really dive into what the situation was. The guy I've hinted at a couple times that we're going to talk a lot about is Victor Oladipo, who his peak was just unbelievable in 2017-18, and really the first third of the season, I'd say, maybe half of 2018-19, and much to the Pacers' happiness, 9 games of 2020-21 was also great. Paul George is not going to be featured heavily in this episode because he very predominantly with the Pacers in his whole career has played the 3, even at the 4 for the Clippers a couple of years ago. But his second season in the league, no doubt he was a 2-guard for the Pacers and was pretty good. Not going to get into the top 5, but we're going to talk about him. Chris Mullin, pre-injury, had some good years for the Pacers and had postseason success on what some consider the best Pacers team of all time. We will talk about him. Here's one that I didn't know enough about. Mike Dunleavy. Mike Dunleavy is going to get some shout today for a late 2000 season where he was absolutely the 2-guard for a Pacers team and was very good in a way that, like, I knew. I actually went and watched that team play, but I didn't know enough about how good he was, especially compared to the league and what that season looks like in the context of his career. It's maybe the best. Lance Stephenson's going to get some love today. You all know exactly what season it's going to be if you kept up with the Pacers a lot in the early 2010s, where he was just absolutely phenomenal that year. And Billy Knight, for you, the oldest heads who know the Pacers history the best, beast in the ABA. We're not going to talk about those seasons, but his last season in the NBA where he was all ABA and an all-star, maybe would have been the best, or competed with Reggie. His NBA seasons with the Pacers, left and came back. So we'll have to separate all those out. But clearly, I think a best one there, and we'll get to the bottom of it all. So that's kind of the list of contenders. And I think there's a drop-off. It's like with point guard with Haliburton, where Haliburton has the only all-NBA season by a point guard. There's only 2 guys with that sort of accolade for the Pacers here. And then I think there's a pretty big drop to the 3rd best season, or the 3rd best player season. The top 3, 4 seasons are pretty easy, but actually sorting these became pretty hard for me after that, because you could go kind of a number of different directions if you're going to rank these. So let's contextualize what the best seasons were, who had them, when they were, and what Reggie season was the best is going to be a theme of the day. Before we get to all that, though, this show is sponsored by BetterHelp. When your schedule is packed with kids' activities, big work projects, and more, it's easy to let your priorities slip. Even when you know what makes you happy, it's hard to make time for it sometimes. But when you feel like you have no time for yourself, non-negotiables like therapy are more important than ever. Therapy is helpful for lots of things, like learning positive coping skills and learning how to set boundaries. It empowers you to be the best version of yourself. It's not just for those who have experienced major trauma. If you are thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp at HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. We are back here on Locked On Pacers. Thanks for making us your first listen today. And every single day, make your second listen Locked On NBA, because I helped host it with David Ramil today, talking about LeBron and Steph and Gershon Yabusele and breakout candidates for this season. Very fun when I get a chance to talk NBA at large. Locked On NBA for me and David Ramil on the league and those topics. Let's keep going on the Pacers and the best shooting guard seasons in Pacers history. We'll go non-Reggie division for much of this segment, just so I can tell you who the contenders are and why they were so great. And I think an easy place to start, and one that a lot of you listening probably remember, because honestly, he helped this podcast get really going, because the Pacers were very exciting the first year that Locked On Pacers existed. Victor Oladipo in 2017-18. Unbelievably good season. All-NBA. The only non-Reggie Miller two guards who make All-NBA for the Pacers is Reggie Miller in 2017-18. And it was just so magical, like, to experience. Like, the team, again, this was similar to the Pacers last year. The teams that smash expectations are so fun, and especially when someone like Vic does it the way he did. And something that will get lost in these numbers is how many clutch shots he made that made it that much more exciting, and you just felt like the Pacers were never out of anything that year. And that was really fascinating, because that year's team, unlike last year's team, that team was awesome on defense. The 2017-18 Pacers, I believe, finished third in defensive rating. I'll double check while I'm talking. And that was kind of the bread and butter of those McMillan teams, were guarding that way. And Vic made their offense good, right? In an era where their offense never really was awesome or so far above average or dominant, he made it successful. That year, Victor Oladipo, who only cracked 20 points per game, never really for a full season, but in like little spurts, 9 games with the Pacers in 2020-21 and 20 games with the Rockets that same year. So not a full season, though, because he finished that season under 20 points per game. This season is the only time he was over 20 points per game. He gets to 23 points per game for the Pacers that year. 37% from deep, his career high, until 8 games with the Heat a couple years ago. I'm not going to count that. So his career high on a full season. 75 games was the second most he played in a full season. He finished at the rim. He got rebounds, over 5 in the game. He had a good enough assist rate on a team that didn't pass enough, 4.3 per game. 2.4 steals per game. That led the NBA, which was crazy, and was just brilliant. Got MVP votes, made an all-defensive team, made an all-NBA team, all-star team for the first time of his career, most improved player, got defensive player of the year votes. People forget, Vic was a terror that year. He was awesome. It was ridiculous how good he was on the defensive end. One of his most impactful defensive seasons. In fact, Defensive Box Plus Minus says that was his best defensive season that year. He led the league in steal rate as well. His block rate was 2% for the only time of his career. I'm just reading stats right now, but a lot of you listening to this are well aware of what I'm talking about, from the IU connection, from the Pacers connection, for a million reasons. He was unbelievably good that year, and the amount he played was awesome. And this could have been a contender for even higher if they didn't play LeBron in the first round, because they would the Cavs made the playoffs, or the finals, excuse me, and the Pacers pushed them better than anyone in that postseason run. And Vic led the playoffs in steals. He averaged 23 points a game there. He shot over 40% from deep on 8 attempts a game in the playoffs, 8 rebounds, 6 assists. He was awesome. And people will forget that he got double teamed early in the series, and the Pacers did not have enough answers for it. And that was one of the reasons they weren't able to actually win the series, right? That was a thorn in his side. And once he figured it out, he was awesome, right? It was just a ridiculous coming out party, this turning point of like, wow, the Pacers saved themselves coming out of this Paul George era. That's awesome. He starts off the next season looking pretty good. Not quite the same, but pretty good. Dealing with some injuries here and there. And obviously, he was never the same player after 2018-19. He was an all-star again. But that 17-18 season, I mean, that could get close to top 5 Pacers seasons ever. It's probably not going to make it. In fact, I bet it won't. But it's going to be in the top 10 for sure. I'm probably going to track more than just the top 5, even though the top 5s I'll reveal at the end. And that season was awesome. It was just fantastic. Paul George's only season where he was a starter and meaningfully playing at the 2, 12 points, 5.5 rebounds, good 3-point shooting. Pretty good player. A lot of signs. But first of all, the reason he's even being talked about right now is he showed signs of passing and he could guard. And at age 21, he could guard. And that matters a lot for impact stats, and that matters a lot for all sorts of things. The very next season, he led the league in defensive win shares and like won most improved and hit the map. Like he wasn't he doesn't deserve top 5 for his best season at shooting guard, but he does deserve discussion because he was kind of this do-it-all 21-year-old who played in all 66 games that year, and it was like, oh. And then the playoffs, he was not very good. So that's why this one doesn't get any more chatter than this. But clearly the 2 guard then, they still had Danny at the time at the 3, and Paul was clearly becoming something, even though that he moved to the 3, but when he became anything. So that's all you'll get about him today. Mike Dunleavy. Shout out Mike Dunleavy. We're talking a lot about him for a second. Never an all-star, never an award winner, and yet for a glimmer of time, a wonderfully talented Pacers player. In 2007, 2008, not a fun time for the Pacers franchise. Not winning enough. Danny was great, but they needed some other star power. For this brief stretch in 2007, 2008, Mike Dunleavy was a terror. 19 points per game, over 5 rebounds, 3.5 assists, and was on fire from 3, 42.4%. That was his second best shooting season from 3 on almost 5 attempts per game. He played all 82 games for that Pacers team. They didn't make the playoffs. There's a cap on how good the season really was, but they were an awesome shooting team. 3rd in the league in attempts, 8th in percentage. JOB wanted that team to get him up, and Dunleavy made it happen and pushed Danny in scoring. Like almost was the leading scorer for that team, made over half of his 2s, finished 6th in most improved player voting, one of his 3 seasons getting awards votes. Mike Dunleavy was very good that year and was very clearly the 2 guard with Danny Troy and Jeff Foster rounding out the front court. What a time for the Pacers. Clearly his best season, by far his most impactful by the numbers, highest usage he had of his career, except for the following season, which he was worse in a lot of other ways. He probably had too high of usage in 2008, 2009. But in 07, 08, very good Mike Dunleavy, over 60% true shooting on high usage and drilling 3s along the way. That's a great player. That's actually a pretty valuable player, and one that even in modern day, if he was playing now, would look awesome. He's not going to make the top 5 of this discussion, but a very, very good player. Very good season as well, worth bringing up. Lance Stephenson, 2013-14. Many of you will remember this season extremely fondly. The Pacers got to the conference finals. They were 1 game away from the finals, as has been a thing for the franchise so often. And Lance, his growth specifically was a big part of that, right? The year before he started and was good and like, oh, this guy's something, and got some most improved player votes, but wasn't like dominating or averaging all these stats. And then the next year, Lance's best year by far. Perfect timing for him contractually, and perfect timing for the Pacers. They tried to ascend to a conference finals team. 13.8 points. Only time he's been over 10 for a season. 7.2 rebounds. The only time he's been over 4.5. He got over 7. 4.6 assists per game. One of only 2 times he was over 2.9 assists per game was that season. Just did everything and defended pretty well along the way. Finished 2nd in most improved player that season, going from pretty good to really good and starter on a good team. Goran Dragic won most improved player that year and pretty much dominated. Lance finished ahead of Anthony Davis. Phenomenal how much better he got that year and how good that season truly was. Triple-double machine there for a second. People were like using his triple-doubles. He had 5 that year, which led the NBA, by the way. People were using that as an argument for his all-star candidacy. He didn't deserve to be an all-star. I don't mean that in a negative way at all, but he was close enough that it's like a thing. He was a worthy candidate to be in those discussions. In fact, he finished 7th among Eastern Conference guards in all-star voting that season. So this was by far his career peak. Like, it's not even close. He was a good defender. His offensive game was well-rounded and very impactful. The team was very good. He starts blowing LeBron's ear. They make the playoffs, make the conference finals. And oh, by the way, he was good in the playoffs. He shot it good enough from 3. He made his 2s. He averaged 14, 7, and 4. Like, stats didn't drop off. Really good Lane Stephenson season. A big part of why the fan base fell in love with him was how good he was in that campaign. He has not hit that peak. He's had games where he is just as effective as that for a full season. It hasn't happened, but for a glimmer there, an unbelievably good 2-guard who was perfect between Paul and George. The passing he provided between those 2 guys, they needed just a little bit more of it. He gave it to him. He could defend. He could score. He gave him just an energy, right? Everybody knows about it. Really great Lance Stephenson season that absolutely deserves to be in this. And Billy Knight, of course, the final contender for this to me. 1976-77. We talked about the same season with Don Busey. The first year for the Pacers in the NBA. And Billy Knight was an all-star. He averaged 27 points per game. That's a lot. That's good. He averaged 7.5 rebounds per game. That's phenomenal. The year before in the ABA, he averaged over 10 as a shooting guard. He was pretty big. He was wing-sized, but a little thinner. Crazy how effective he was on the glass for a guard. Efficient from the field. This was pre-3-point line, so impossible to know what level of shooter he could have been. He did shoot it well in the ABA the year before this, but to be an all-star like that, to score like that, he finished this is the stat that I will close you with for this one before we get to actual rankings. Billy Knight outscored Kareem per game that season. Billy Knight was second in the NBA in scoring. He finished ahead of Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, ahead of David Thompson, ahead of tons of legends. Pete Maravich smoked him. Pete Maravich was unbelievable that year, but he outscored Kareem. Like, that's crazy. In an NBA season, phenomenal year for Billy Knight. Those are our contenders, along with Reggie's whole career, for the best season by a two-guard in Pacers history. What is the top five? What should be the top five? How will it sort out? Let's get to all that here in the third segment. Before we do that, though, we're talking about Gametime, the best place to get tickets for theater, comedy, sports, whatever near you. And they have a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. You've got to do it. They have so many live events you can hop into in whatever type of field or industry you're looking for. I used it to go watch the Liberty play the Dallas Wings 2 years ago. It was phenomenal. I love the view from your seat feature. It was spot on. I love that you could toggle off the hidden fees so you know exactly what you're paying at checkout. I love that they have super deals. They have a lowest price guarantee. They have an event cancellation policy. They have job loss protection. Everything that you should want from a ticketing app, they have, and there's no guesswork. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets and concert tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. And we're back here on Locked On Pacers. Thanks for making us your first listen today and every single day. Second listen, Locked On Sixers. Gerson Yabusele, great Olympics. He's back in the NBA. Locked On Sixers can talk about that. I wish I could. He was so fun to watch, and I want to talk about that. But Locked On Sixers can. That's the power of the Locked On Network. Okay, I'll spoil that the 5 seasons are 3 Reggie seasons, the Billy Knight season I just talked about, and the Oladipo season. Ordering them was exceedingly hard because it is very tempting for me to just put some Reggie seasons at the top and go, yep, done. I feel good. I cannot decide. I think that you could quibble a lot of ways with the best Reggie season, right? Because the playoff run he had when they made the finals itself was like not as good as the total stats, still good, but he was so good in the playoffs in 2000, right? Maybe that should be the answer. And I already ran through this exercise. I don't need to totally belabor you with it again. But like his best transformative season for him specifically, right? To me, if you sucked out the playoff part of this, I might pick 1996-97 for the best Reggie season. He started chucking. He was taking the threes, 6.6 per game. That finished third in the NBA behind just the thief, Mookie Blaylock, and Tim Hardaway, right? And that's the most he took in a season per game. He transformed himself a little bit before that, and then he really started to get him up like per minute at that stage, and he hit them at a high level. And so that individually was a very good season for him. His second best scoring season, but the team wasn't as good. That's the year they missed the playoffs. And sandwiched between 3 seasons where he made an All-NBA team and an All-Star team, he has just this really awesome individual season where the team stinks and he doesn't get any actual accolades. So it's hard for me to rank that one correctly. 98 is what many consider the best Pacers team ever, despite them not making the finals. That year, he got MVP votes for the only time of it, or one of the only times of his career, and was an All-NBA guy, and then All-Star at 19.5 points per game, shot it well, but a lot of his other stats weren't necessarily there. But, of course, was very good in the playoffs, 20 points per game, shot it well from 3. So how do you separate these? What is the actual way to do it? It's kind of just whatever you flavor it, however you are going to do it, right? And so I'll get to my top answer in a second. But a Reggie season is going to finish 5th for me, and that is the 1994-95 season that Reggie Miller produced. His first All-NBA season, his second All-Star appearance, 81 games, 19.6 points per game. Flew up his three-point shooting volume for the first time. 3 assists per game. Good rebounding numbers that year. Got his turnover numbers down from the year before. Clearly was very good. Clearly on the map after a big playoff run the year before. And that year, he was awesome in the postseason. Just phenomenal. 25.5 points per game. Sorry for keep looking off to the side. I have so many stats for this one. Upped his rebounding a ton in the playoffs. Did a great job, of course, leading that Pacers team to enormous heights. They did not make the finals. That year is probably the year that most Pacers fans feel like is the year they should have made the finals. They lost to the Orlando Magic that year with MJ out of league. But very good in the regular season. Very good in the playoffs for Reggie Miller. 1994-95 to me for Reggie, the 5th best shooting guard season. Number 4, we're going to go with Billy Knight in 77. I already talked about it. Very good year. One of the top scorers in the league. Again, if you outscore Kareem, that's the whole thing. But all-star appearance, helped the Pacers bridge their way into the NBA. Phenomenal scorer at a lot of levels. Really hard to guard. Really good player. And those who played with him all were like, yeah, this dude was the best player on those teams, right? He was really good. Again, didn't have quite the ABA run that some of those ABA legends did, but was still very good for the Pacers. Came back to the Pacers later in the early 80s. Wasn't the same player, but for one season, he was just phenomenal. A ridiculous scorer and earning the title of shooting guard and getting into this spot. Number 3 for me, I'm going with Oladipo in 2018. I mean, just a ridiculous player. Freak of nature on both ends. The defensive success was there. This could have been 2 for me. If they had beaten LeBron, if they had won that series, who knows what would have happened after that, right? I think they would have played the 1 seed. I don't even remember who it was that year. All the Pacers cared about was their first round opponent, but had they won and gotten another series and had another chance to keep showing like, hey, we're a really good defensive team with one of the best 10 players in the league right there, that could have vaulted this up. So playing LeBron really hurts, but this is probably the best defensive season of any of the top 8, 9 guys that we're talking about. In fact, I think you dropped the probably. It's pretty clearly the best defensive season of any of these guys. And he paired it with that scoring and good passing and good rebounding. Vic was unreal for a sec. And he got back just enough. I mean, I don't know this, right? I would love to truth serum the Rockets from, that time, 2020, 21, when they were pivoting out of James Harden. They got Oladipo in that trade. And Vic for the Pacers in those 9 games that year shot it okay, took a bunch of threes and averaged 20 points a game. I wonder if they thought, man, what if we could have him be that good again? Because he was good enough for those 9 games, right? If he stunk for those 9 games to open that season, I wonder if any of that's possible, if the Pacers could have gotten LeVert, if they could have pivoted the way they did from era to era. And of course, LeVert ended up getting them Nembhard a few years later. That's too much off the rails, but Vic was so good that year. I think it was the 3rd best Pacers season by a point guard. My top 2 Reggie seasons, what are they? What should they be? Again, I feel kind of bad leaving 1990 out of this top 5 completely. His best regular season by far, his first All-Star appearance, top 2 and most improved player. But the playoff success wasn't there, and it wasn't just like so awesome. It was really good, don't get me wrong. And he upped his efficiency from inside the arc tremendously that year, which kind of transformed who he was. But I think peak Reggie in my head and peak Reggie statistically, for a lot of reasons, is 1996-97 is going to be my 2nd best Reggie Miller season. I think that was probably the best he played, but not the best the Pacers played, obviously, as for the reasons I just described. And I'm going to put the best Reggie Miller season for me. I'm up to many debate from this. There's lots of seasons that could be the winner here. Is 1997-98. That, again, many consider to be the best Pacers team that existed, losing to MJ. Reggie finished in the top 15 for MVP voting that year. He was 3rd team All-NBA and All-Star, 19.5 points a game, 43% from long range for a good Pacers team, still at age 32, proving to be one of the best players in the league. And what makes this one so solid, again, is their awesome playoff run, 20 points a game in the postseason, hitting threes at a 40% clip. The only time he did that from between 1996 and 2000 was that season, 40% from 3 in the playoffs. Pacers so close for the finals. So 2000, I think, has a good shake to be here. In fact, I kind of feel like that should have been my 5th one instead of 1995. But I think the best Reggie season was 1998. Myself, and looking back through it, that's what I would put first. But I'm very curious, people who lived through that time, what do you remember as the best Reggie season, right? Because, again, he was so good when they made the finals and the playoffs that year, even though his regular season was, starting to show signs of maybe not being the peak or the dominant Reggie, right? Where do you draw that bridge there? What do you think of his early seasons where the team wasn't as good, but he was sensational? He almost hit 25 points a game for a season, right? How that all is baked into people who lived through its eyes, I'll be curious about. And I got to watch, of course, the end of the Reggie era, given my age. So I want you all to chime in. What do you think the answer is? Am I weighing too much team success and playoff success into this? Obviously, a phenomenal player deserves probably 5 of the best 7 or 8 seasons by a shooting guard in Pacers history, and easily deserves the top spot. And if someone else did this list and they had a different answer, number 1, I'd go, yep, great, sounds good. I can't argue with your reasoning. But that stretch from 97 to 2000, definitely his best 4-year stretch of his career. Pick your poison for what you think the best Reggie Miller season was. Hope you guys enjoyed this and are learning something. I am learning something, which I find to be extremely valuable, of course, as I continue to talk about and cover this team for hopefully a long time. I would like to know as much of this stuff as I possibly can. Next week, we'll do small forwards, where we'll talk much more about Paul George and many other Pacers players. That'll be an interesting one to kind of dive into. I think the top's going to be obvious, and after that, we'll see. Some Danny Granger talk certainly coming as well. Tomorrow, second player interview this August is coming. Kyle Mangus from the Mad Ants and Pacers last year, and many of you who know anything about Indiana basketball below the pro level will know tons about Kyle. We talked about his summer league experience with the Lakers, what his plans are for this season, last year with the Mad Ants and Pacers, Jarris Walker, Quentin Jackson. We get to do a ton of stuff. It's really good stuff. So I hope you guys enjoy that. And then later in the week, we'll get more into looking at some of the Pacers' newer players under more of a microscope. Hope you guys enjoyed today's show. Hope you're having a wonderful week. We will see you tomorrow.